But in this case, unfortunately, the FBI also had the opportunity to take actions that would have prevented the Fort Hood murders and failed to do so. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force in San Diego flagged Hassan's initial communications with the
Senator from West Virginia is recognized.
I thank the presiding officer. I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment
The senator from West Virginia is advised we're currently in a quorum.
The senator from West Virginia asks unanimous consent to rescind the quorum call.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment to call up on behalf of Senator Ensign the Ensign Amendment number 32.
Without objection. Clerk will report the amendment.
The senator from West Virginia, Mr. Rockefeller, for Mr. Ensign and others, proposes amendment number 32.
I ask consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to... All right. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with Senator allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Shouldn't be, right? Mr. Quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. As we wait for a senator to speak, more from that Senate report that said the FBI's top leaders must exercise more control over local field offices and put to better use the intelligence analysts that should have been able to connect the dots in the Fort Hood shooting.
For review and transfer those communications to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force here in Washington because Hassan was located here at Walter Reed. The Washington Joint Terrorism Task Force waited 6 weeks to assign the case, and then it was given to a Department of Defense detailee to the Terrorism Task Force, who then waited 3 months before producing a cursory report that, from evidence we've gathered, took him all of 4 hours to write. That report explained Hassan's communications with the suspected terrorist as research based on the sanitized and misleading officer evaluation report of Hassan from Walter Reed. The FBI's inquiry was limited, focused only on whether Hassan was engaged in plotting a terrorist attack, not whether or not his communications might be evidence that he was radicalizing to violent Islamist extremism in a way that could well lead to an attack. In sum, the FBI conducted a superficial inquiry and ended it prematurely. San Diego Joint Terrorism Task Force was upset with the way the Washington Task Force handled the case, but they too dropped the matter. FBI headquarters, specifically the National Joint Terrorism Task Force and Counterterrorism Division, never got involved in the investigation, although these two parts of FBI headquarters are responsible for overseeing the Bureau's counterterrorism work. As we say in our report, the Fort Hood attack was a warning that the FBI's transformation remains a work in progress and that the FBI must accelerate it, particularly given the growing complexity and diversity of the homegrown terrorist threat. Our investigation also reaffirmed what we have known since the 9/11 Commission reached the following fundamental conclusion in its seminal report in the summer of 2004. America's enemy today is not terrorism or a particular terrorist organization or a particular religion. The enemy is the ideology, the political ideology of violent Islamist extremism. Despite the remarkable work of America's military, intelligence, and law enforcement organizations and personnel in pushing back the forces of terrorism and preventing individual terrorist attacks since 9/11, the ideology that inspired 9/11 and other attacks and plots around the world continues to motivate individuals to commit terrorism. And that now increasingly includes Americans, inside and outside America, people we refer to now as homegrown terrorists. We must take strong new steps, urgently and with the same sense of purpose we all felt following the 9/11 attacks, to identify and combat the ideology of violent Islamist extremism and to prevent the terrorist attacks against Americans which that ideology causes. In our report, briefly, we make the following recommendations. Department of Defense policies against extremism among service members must finally explicitly describe and confront violent Islamist extremism. The Department of Defense can no longer subsume that reality within vague, inexact, and politically correct terms like violent extremism or workplace violence. It is violent Islamist extremism. Second, our military must clearly differentiate between violent Islamist extremism and protected religious observance, particularly, of course, by Muslims. That way, the thousands of Muslim Americans who serve our country honorably in the American military every day and in other ways will be protected from suspicion for practicing their religion. Military employment evaluations and personnel records must accurately and candidly describe performance and behavior, or military personnel will pose threats to other members of our military and the public, as was the case with Hassan. The FBI needs to bring its 56 field offices more effectively under the FBI's headquarters leadership. In the Hassan case, 2 field offices disagreed concerning the inquiry into Hassan, but FBI headquarters never stepped in to resolve the dispute and ensure that the evidence on Hassan received the urgent and aggressive attention it deserved. The FBI needs to do more to make certain that its Joint Terrorism Task Forces more effectively share information and coordinate operations with other federal, state, and local agencies. In the Hassan case, the Department of Defense, as I've said, was not informed of the FBI's inquiry into Hassan, even though, I repeat, a service member radicalizing to violent Islamist extremism clearly posed a threat to our military and our country. The FBI should take steps to make sure the large number of intelligence analysts it has hired since 9/11 are used effectively. That was not the case with regard to Hassan. Finally, and most broadly, our government must develop a more comprehensive national strategy to counter domestic radicalization to Islamist extremism. We have not adequately defined the roles and responsibilities of agencies of our government and other institutions of our society that must effectively counter radicalization to violent Islamist extremism in our country. And of course, that work must be done with leaders of the Muslim American community. 13 people were killed at Fort Hood. To honor their memory, we pledge to use this report and its recommendations as a blueprint to ensure the appropriate reforms are adopted quickly so the next human ticking time bomb will be identified early and diffused before another deadly detonation. We believe this report and its recommendations are particularly timely given the dramatic increase in homegrown terrorist plots against America and Americans over the past 2 years. And finally, Senator Collins and I are today transmitting this report to the Secretary of Defense, the Director of the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor at the National Security Council with our request that they respond to our findings, recommendations, and questions as soon as possible. We're also sending a copy of the report to the President for his review. Senator Collins.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very pleased to join Chairman Lieberman in releasing today our investigative report into the events leading up to the Fort Hood attack. Before I begin my formal remarks, I want to thank the Chairman for working as a team, as we do on so many issues. Our staffs also worked as one, and I want to echo the Chairman's thanks to our staff, led by Michael Alexander and Brandon Milhorn. They've worked extremely hard over this past year. They've encountered a lot of resistance along the way, but we all have persevered to bring us to where we are today. Our conclusion is alarming. The Department of Defense and the FBI collectively had sufficient information to have detected Major Hassan's radicalization to violent Islamist extremism, but failed to act effectively on the many red flags signaling that he had become a potential threat. Due to multiple misjudgments and failures to act, actions that might have prevented his attacks were not taken. Detecting a lone wolf can be very difficult, but in this case, the fact is that both the FBI and the Army were aware of Major Hassan. This is not a case where a lone wolf was unknown to the FBI, unknown to the military officials until he struck. And that is the tragedy of this case. Major Hassan was known to both the FBI and to the Army. This was an American military officer known to have communicated with a terrorist suspect under active investigation by the FBI, a military officer whose radical extremism was increasingly evident to his colleagues and to his superiors. Most disturbing to me are three failures. First was the failure of the Department of Defense to act on Hassan's obvious radicalization by at least disciplining him or even discharging him. And I want to point out that those are actions that could have been taken, that should have been taken under existing personnel and extremism policies. Hassan's increasing extremism was well known to his supervisors and his colleagues at Walter Reed, as was his poor performance. Hassan traced a clear path toward radicalization in plain view of his fellow Army officers. Indeed, as the chairman has pointed out, his revelations of his acceptance of violent ideology disturbed his colleagues to the point that two of them separately described him as a ticking time bomb. Yet, despite all these indications, despite the clear evidence, the Army took no action, laying the foundation for what would be a cursory investigation by the FBI, which relied in part on Hassan's inadequate and misleading officer evaluations. The second finding that is most disturbing to me was the failure of the Joint Terrorism Task Force to share with the Army the fact that Hassan was communicating with a known terrorist. In this case, the JTTF did not live up to its potential and acted instead as another stovepipe instead of communicating vital information. Third, in my judgment, was the woefully, the inexcusably inadequate investigation conducted by the Washington Joint Terrorism Task Force. As the chairman has pointed out, it was about a half day, 4 hours. That is all the time that the Washington JTTF spent investigating whether a military officer in communication with a known terrorist suspect amounted to a national security threat. Additional investigative action was not taken even when the JTTF responsible for forwarding the lead pressed for more action. This hasty decision to close the investigation cost the government its last best chance to identify the threat posed by the major and to potentially prevent the November 2009 attack. Let me make just a few other important points. Our investigation revealed that there were no legal restrictions that encumbered the investigation of Major Hassan. You may recall that at first, administration officials pointed to restrictions that they said made it difficult to conduct the investigation. What we have found is there were no legal restrictions that hindered that investigation. Similarly, there were no legal restrictions that prevented the sharing of investigative information on Hassan, and particularly his communications with the known terrorist suspect, with the Army. There was no reason that information could not have been communicated. Third, Hassan's behavior and declarations of Walter Reed were not First Amendment protected activities, and they went far beyond an academic debate. It's clear that the FBI has made great progress in focusing on counterterrorism since the attacks on our country nearly 10 years ago. And the FBI has experienced some successes for which we give them credit, for which our nation is grateful. But it is equally clear from our year-long investigation that much additional work is needed to truly transform the FBI into a counterterrorism effective organization. And much more needs to be done by this administration to name the enemy that we face and to develop strategies to counter it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Collins. Thanks for all the partnership that, once again, we and our staffs have been able to bring to play to deal with this real threat to our security. We're open to questions now.
Senator, based on the litany of failures and the missed opportunities, what do you say directly to the families of the victims at Fort Hood, those 32 people wounded, some of them still carrying the bullets from that attack?
You know, this is heartbreaking because the painful conclusion of our investigation is that the massacre carried out by Hassan at Fort Hood in November of 2009 could have been prevented. And what can you say to the families of people who were killed there other than to say that, having found what we have found, that this was a preventable attack, that we will do everything we can to push the relevant federal government agencies to do like this ever happens again. I mean, this was the Fort Hood massacre resulted because of what I would call a tragedy of errors, just one after another, by organizations that normally perform effectively, but in this case, for a host of various reasons, and frankly some things that were hard to explain, just totally failed to act in a way that, as you look back at the evidence with the clarity of hindsight, just shouts out, stop this guy before he kills somebody. And he was not stopped. Senator Collins, do you want to respond?
I would just echo the chairman's comments. We kept in mind the victims and their families throughout this investigation, and it's why that we kept pushing forward, and it's why that we kept demanding information. It's why we took the very unusual step of actually issuing subpoenas, because we did want to thoroughly understand what happened and make sure that we're truthful with the families about what happened, and that we put in place effective reforms to greatly lessen the chances of such an attack happening again.
Senator, is anyone going to, or has anyone been at least disciplined or fired for the failures mentioned in this report?
I don't believe anyone has been disciplined or terminated because of the failures mentioned in this report, and that's something that I want to hear about from both the Department of Defense and the FBI and the others we're sending the report to. I mean, this just, people, look, there wasn't evil intent on people in the federal government. There was just what I would call negligence, failure to perform the duties as we have a right to expect federal employees will do, and as of yet, no one has been held accountable.
And that is very disturbing. The Department of Defense has told us that they are waiting until after the legal proceedings against Major Hassan are completed, and I expect and hope that we'll see action at that time. But it's a long time.
Yeah, I want to say real briefly, if you're interested in this part of it, we spent a lot of time, as I said in my statement, in argument and negotiation with the law enforcement and intelligence community. There were two arguments made. One was that we had to be careful not to disclose information that we had learned that would compromise ongoing counterterrorism investigation. Of course, we don't want to do that, so we've tried very hard to accept those. The other was that because there was an ongoing prosecution of Hassan in the military justice system, that we had to be careful not to affect that prosecution. And we argued, we still feel today, that we were not about determining guilt or innocence on November 5th, 2009, when this occurred. In other words, the murder case. We're trying to figure out, how did he get to that point to be able to stand up, shout out Allahu Akbar, and then kill 13 Americans. And so that was what a lot of time was spent on, negotiating, arguing over, and finally we thought we had enough to go ahead publicly and issue our report.
Mr. Chairman, your report sounds somewhat reminiscent of reports after 9/11 and the failure to connect the dots. Does your report, does Fort Hood, show that perhaps not as much progress had been made to connect the dots and share information as believed?
Well, our committee spends a lot of time on this. I think that a lot of progress has been made in connecting the dots with the establishment of the National Counterterrorism Center and the Director of National Intelligence. I'm convinced that if those two organizations existed prior to 9/11, that we would have been able to stop the attacks of 9/11. But this case, the Hassan case, shows that the work is unfinished. And here, in two separate agencies, really great agencies, the Department of Defense and the FBI, they just acted in a way that was negligent and not intelligent, and with no sense of urgency, when warning lights should have been flashing. And part of this is not only to make sure that they take some of the steps that we recommended, but that the next time somebody in the FBI or somebody in the DOD hears somebody who's a fellow service member saying some of the things that Hassan said, that they'll report him or her immediately. And the same is true of somebody in the FBI who sees a communication to a known terrorist suspect, that they'll act more aggressively than they'll let it sit on the desk for 3 months.
There have been some clear successes. For example, the Zazi case and the Headley case are examples where federal, state, local law enforcement, intelligence agencies did work together and thwarted terrorism plots. There have been others that have just been close calls that we've been surprised by. In this case, however, I do believe it's fair to say that the dots were not connected, despite the fact that great progress has been made since 9/11 of 01.
Yes.
I guess, what sort of practical steps do you think that the FBI and the Army could take to form a better relationship with the Muslim community? That's one of the things you mentioned in the report, is that a better relationship with the Muslim community would have helped in this scenario. And how do you strike the balance, especially since many Muslim organizations and communities have objected to various sorts of law enforcement surveillance techniques?
Interestingly, now it's probably a couple of years old. I mean, this committee, our committee, has been doing an ongoing, as we mentioned in the report, series of hearings and investigations regarding homegrown terrorism for now, what, 4 years? Since 2007. One of the interesting things we found at one of those hearings, where we had a group of leaders of the Muslim American community, and I asked them did they have any good relations with any federal organization, and interestingly, the answer was the FBI. The FBI, through its Joint Terrorism Task Forces and the special agents, has actually reached out quite effectively to the Muslim American community. But I think and there's a lot of anxiety, understandably, in the Muslim American community about people within the community, particularly young people, being radicalized to not take advantage of the opportunities in America, but to become anti-American terrorists. So that's why there needs to be cooperation between our law enforcement and intelligence community and the Muslim American community. In the Department of Defense, as far as we can determine, they're still not prepared to, as Senator Collins said, the Department of Defense is still not prepared to call the enemy what it is. And, you know, unless you know your enemy and describe it, you're not going to be able to meet it and defeat it. The enemy is violent Islamist extremism. And to me, that when you say that, it shouldn't offend Muslim Americans, the overwhelming majority of whom are clearly not violent Islamist extremists. They're Muslim, they're patriotic, law-abiding Muslim Americans. So in the Department of Defense, I think they got to start by being truthful about what the enemy is, who the enemy is here.
Last question, please.
I just wanted to ask you, Hassan has been charged as a lone gunman, and whether in your investigation you saw any evidence of a terrorist conspiracy here, the contacts in Yemen, wire transfers to and from Pakistan, whether you see a broader conspiracy arising from this attack.
The answer is no. There was no evidence that Hassan was part of a broader conspiracy. I mean, this is what makes these cases typically so difficult, except that here, as we've said to you, he was open in these statements that were radical at Walter Reed, and the FBI happened to intercept this communication with the terrorist suspect. It just shows the difficulty of this. As far as our investigation showed Hassan really was a lone wolf. It bears stating that today a lot of lone wolves who are radical Islamist terrorists potentially can become, by their individual action, part of a larger conspiracy just by going on the internet. And as he did, in communicating with this well-known anti-American terrorist who's, halfway around the globe, asking him questions, getting answers to what was acceptable behavior, going into chat rooms, and that's clearly as part of an attempt, how do we better fight the ideology of violent Islamist extremism. One of the things we've got to try to do, and I know we're doing some of it now, is to intervene to try to present the other side, if you will, to people trying to become part of a larger conspiracy, even though they're acting individually.
In general, what we've found through our investigation into homegrown terrorism is that the individual is frequently inspired by Al-Qaeda or by other violent Islamic leaders, but not directed by them. Now, that can happen on occasion, but that is the more common pattern that we see. But to me, to go back to a point I made earlier, what's so frustrating in this case is this was not the lone wolf operating covertly with no one aware of his existence or his communication with the known terrorist suspect. This is an individual who is open about the fact that he has radicalized, who says outrageous statements in front of an entire class of military officers, and yet he's promoted. It's just astonishing and very troubling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More debate on the Federal Aviation Administration bill coming up tomorrow. Majority Leader Reid says the next votes in the chamber will happen Monday night, and then also some votes on Tuesday morning. A little earlier today in the afternoon, Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman John Kerry and Senator John McCain, the top Republican on the Armed Services Committee, introduced a resolution urging Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak to hand over power to a caretaker government and begin the transition to a democratic society. The State Department briefing today focused on what's happening in Egypt with spokesman P.J. Crowley.
Welcome to the Department of State. I know the issue of the day is Egypt, and we'll get to that soon enough, but we did this morning have some news from Haiti regarding the announcement of the final election results there, and we thought as a target of opportunity we pulled Ambassador Ken Merton out of a lunch with the Vice President to just give you a kind of a quick sense of what this means. We'll just have him do 1 or 2 questions, and we'll send him back to the conference. Ken, thanks.
Thanks, PJ. It's good to see you all. Very quickly, we had it's a good day in Haiti today again. We had some positive results from the CEP early this morning. They announced the final results of the parliamentary and presidential elections. We are pleased to note that they seem to have been very diligent in following the OAS verification mission's report's recommendations, and we salute their work in this regard. We look forward to continuing to work with the CEP, the Haitian government, and most importantly the Haitian people as we move forward to the second round of elections, both at the presidential and legislative levels. I understand that they have a calendar which has been published by the CEP, which envisions the second round of elections on March 20th. So between now and then, we'll be working very closely with our Haitian and international partners to prepare for that. We would also want to make sure that all the actors in Haiti, the political actors and the Haitian people, remain calm. We're very happy that they have remained calm and patient throughout this period while they have sorted through the results of the first round, and we urge everybody to continue to remain calm and peaceful. Anyway, if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to.
Yes, it does. Could you say something about the economic situation in Haiti? I mean, there is still the conditions of people living in the camps. It seems like it's gone very, very slowly since they were hit. And are there any attempts to speed things up to try and get some kind of economic stability in that country?
Well, number one, it's a great question. I firmly believe that we get the political situation back on track in terms of legitimately elected president and parliament. I think that will bring a feeling of stability to the country. And that, in turn, will encourage economic investment. I would call to your attention the fact that the U.S. government, the Haitian government, Korean firm SEA, and the Inter-American Development Bank recently signed an MOU to build a large industrial park in the northern part of Haiti, which will create, when it's finished, between 20 and 25,000 jobs. We hope to continue to work with other partners for other kinds of opportunities like that in Haiti. I personally believe that getting that kind of economic growth into Haiti will really help people's purchasing power and build for long-term stability there.
Can you address, and forgive me if I missed it in your opening remarks, but can you address the upcoming expiration of the President's mandate on February the 7th?
Right. I mean, the Secretary mentioned this in a recent trip to Haiti as well in some remarks. In the Haitian Constitution, the date of February 7th is mentioned. How that date is interpreted, as what the Secretary said, how that date is interpreted and what the President and the people of Haiti decide is up to them. I'm only going to echo that. I mean, I think it is something that they have to work through. I think the important thing is that we now have a process in front of us, and we intend to assist and help the Haitian people move forward.
You say that you would prefer that his mandate be extended so that there would not be a period of vacuum before there's a duly elected president?
I mean, our goal is again, to support what the Haitian people want and for there to be a peaceful turnover of power from one legitimately elected president to another. We hope that occurs within the framework of Haitian law. I'll just leave it at that. Anything else?
Sir, I just want to follow earlier question that people of Haiti earlier were crying for basic needs. Are they getting the basics now after what they have gone through?
I think the international community has done a terrific job, and not to pat the United States on the back more than anybody else, but we've played an important role in that. The international community has done a terrific job in dealing with the Haitian population's basic humanitarian needs in the wake of the earthquake. Obviously, we're at a point now where we are moving beyond that. We are entering a reconstruction phase where we hope that with increasing investment and increasing construction jobs and other things appearing on the ground in Haiti, that people will be in a better position to take care of themselves as we move forward. But I think people's basic needs are certainly being much better met in an effective way than they were right after the earthquake. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Ken, thank you very much. Just a couple of additional things to mention before moving to Egypt. The Secretary this afternoon will meet with Croatian Deputy Prime Minister Jan Drukovic. They'll discuss bilateral and regional issues, including the United States' strong support for Croatia's membership in the European Union, and the hope that Croatia will fulfill the remaining requirements as soon as possible. Croatia also contributes significantly to international security operations, including ISAF, and is a leader in the Western Balkans. And they'll discuss Croatia's positive role in promoting stability in South and Central Europe. Now, as part of this, the Secretary and Foreign Minister will sign an Open Skies Agreement, which will expand air travel between the United States and Croatia, paving the way for further tourism and investment opportunities. Earlier today, the Secretary met with Foreign Minister Rodas of Guatemala. They discussed a number of issues, including efforts to improve citizen safety and combat human trafficking. The Secretary underscored the U.S. interest in ensuring that the upcoming September presidential elections are free and fair. She expressed a willingness to work with Guatemala and the OAS to assist as appropriate. And we congratulate the people of Nepal on the election of a new Prime Minister. We look forward to working with incoming Prime Minister Kanal and continuing the warm and constructive relationship between the United States and Nepal. And we are hopeful that today's election, I think it was the 17th and final time, it will give renewed momentum to the peace process and constitutional drafting. The Secretary this morning placed a call to Jordanian King Abdullah. It's about a 15-minute call. She indicated that we look forward to working with Prime Minister Bakit and members of the new Jordanian cabinet. She expressed the United States' ongoing, the importance that we place on the continued excellent relationship with Jordan. We are eager to continue to support Jordan during these difficult times. And the Secretary noted in the call that we appreciate the example that Jordan has set in allowing freedom of expression during recent protests. They did briefly discuss Egypt as well. The Secretary stressed that an orderly process will serve not only Egypt's interest, but also the region, and we remain fully committed to the partnership that we have with Egypt. In terms of the current evacuation effort, we had one flight move today with roughly 50 passengers on board. That brings us to roughly 2,000 U.S. citizens, family members, the official party that have departed Cairo. And we'll continue to assess the need for these flights, but at the present time we do not have any evacuation flights planned for tomorrow. We've seen during the course of the week a declining flow of U.S. citizens to the airport, and we stress again that there are still commercial flights available and there are seats available there. So we'll not have flights tomorrow, but we'll continue to watch this on a day-to-day basis.
There were 3,000 people roughly who had expressed an interest in being helped. You've got 2,000 out. Does that mean, what does that mean in terms of the other 1,000?
Well, that means that U.S. citizens, did take advantage of our recommendation. They registered with us to let us know that they were there. In many cases, they may still have chosen to remain in Egypt, or in other cases, they have gone out through through commercial means. So we will continue to monitor the situation where where American citizens make clear that they still wish to depart.
Majority Leader is recognized.
I ask consent the call to quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I ask consent the joint leadership letter and the colloquy be printed in the record.
Without objection.
I ask consent that we now go to S-Res 42.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 42, to constitute the majority party's membership on certain committees for the 112th Congress or until their successors are chosen.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask consent the resolution be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to this matter appear in the record at the appropriate place as if given.
Without objection.
I now ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to consideration of S-Res 43.
Clerk will report.
S-Res 43, a resolution to constitute the minority party's membership on certain committees for the 112th Congress or until their successors are chosen.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the motion reconsider be agreed to, that there be no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to this matter appear at the appropriate place in the record as if given.
Without objection.
I now ask, Mr. President, we move to S-Res 44.
Clerk will report.
S-Res 44, supporting democracy, universal rights, and the peaceful transition to a representative government in Egypt.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion we consider be laid on the table, there be no intervening action or debate. These statements relating to this matter appear in the record at the appropriate place as if read.
Without objection.
I now ask, Mr. President, we go to S-Res 45.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 45, congratulating the Eastern Washington University football team for winning the 2010 National Collegiate Athletic Association Division I Football Championship Subdivision title.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table, there be no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to this matter appear in the record at the appropriate place as if read.
Without objection.
I ask consent that S-126 be discharged from the Committee on Rules and Administration and be referred to the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Finance Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-109 and the bill referred to the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm told there are 3 bills at the desk due for their first reading.
The clerk will report the bills en bloc.
S-289, a bill to extend expiring provisions of the USA Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 and so forth and for other purposes. S-290, a bill to extend the sunset of certain provisions of the USA Patriot Act and for other purposes. S-291, a bill to repeal the sunset provisions in the USA Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 and so forth.
For second reading of these matters en bloc, but object to my own request en bloc.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent.
The bills will be read the second time on the next legislative day.
I ask unanimous consent that the appointment at the desk appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes the business day, it adjourn until tomorrow morning, Friday, February 4th at 10 a.m. Following the prayer and the pledge, adjourned proceedings be approved to date. Morning hour be deemed expired. The time for the 2 leaders be reserved for the use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, the Senate will proceed to pre-morning business. Senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that we adjourn under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate today continued work on the Federal Aviation Administration Programs Bill. The chamber approved penalties for anyone pointing a laser at an airplane, while an amendment offered by Rand Paul of Kentucky